Hi, everyone. I wanted to share with you a story about being in Urbandale, Iowa, the greater Des Moines region of Iowa last week. I was invited. Well, first of all, we launched the Civic Renaissance Tour in Iowa this week. It was very exciting. I was there with the Central Iowa Chamber of Commerce. I was their closing keynote. And of course, Urbandale, Iowa is a community that just announced the Soul of Civility as their community read, which is so exciting. And I'll be back in Iowa, in Central Iowa, in Urbandale for a Civic Renaissance Summit this September. And these are one of the hubs, nodes within Iowa that are really embracing this work and bringing this possibility of flourishing across difference to life and building an era of multi-dimensional human flourishing in their world. And it's so inspiring, so hope-filled. So it was super wonderful to be with so many people from Urbandale and from Central Iowa at the Chamber of Commerce event. But I was in Chicago at the Aspen Institute first half of last week. I drive 5 hours from Chicago to the Des Moines area where the conference was. I get to the conference center and I come in, I greet, my hosts who had invited me, and I said, okay, I'm starving. Where should I eat? And they said to me, you have to go to Simon's. And I said, okay, sounds great. And they said, oh, actually, wait. Looked at the time. It's too late. It's already, 6 p.m. and the line's around the block, 40 people long. There's no way you'll ever get in, they said to me. I was like, mission accepted. Of course I want to do what they tell me is impossible to do. So I decided to go to, one restaurant for dinner first, but I call Simon's. And here's what they said about it. They said it's just the most popular place in town. Like, everyone loves it because he just greets you by name. He knows everyone. The guy, Simon, who owns it, is just above and beyond gracious and generous and hospitable and warm. And it felt like, to me, an expression of hospitality, this high and noble expression of civility, as I argue it is in my book, The Soul of Civility. And I'm also reading this book right now called Unreasonable Hospitality that I'm absolutely loving, by a guy who says going above and beyond for people isn't excessive. It is the utmost competitive advantage in a competitive market. And the guy who wrote it, Will Guidera, ran the best restaurant in the world called 11 Madison Park in New York City, and wrote this book, his philosophy of management, his philosophy of hospitality, and I really love that book. But anyway, so I wanted to go to see Unreasonable Hospitality in practice. I wanted to go because I was told it was impossible for me to get in. So I'm on my way to restaurant number one for dinner number one, and I call Simon's. I didn't expect to get Simon on the phone, but I did. And he immediately puts me on like a 3-minute hold, and I'm like laughing the whole time. I'm not a very patient person, but I was laughing the whole time because I heard him literally, chatting and greeting people as they came, and running and saying goodbye to people as they left. And I'm like hearing all of this and just like laughing. I'm like, this is so funny. This is so lovely, so wonderful. So finally he picks back the phone. I'm like, hey, like, I'm in town, and I have heard wonderful things about your restaurant. Is there a time, anytime tonight, that I could come where the line wouldn't be too long, like not a 5-hour wait? And he's like, yeah, if you come around 7:30, 7:45, it shouldn't be too bad of a wait. I said, great. So I go have dinner number one and then drive over to Simon's, and there was a really cool, speakeasy that he had built to accommodate people waiting for hours to get into his restaurant. And when I get there, I'm like, having a cocktail, and it's lovely ambiance, really beautiful. And all of a sudden, Simon's like sitting next to me, and we're chatting, and it was just, so personable, so warm. And, we chat for a little bit and then move over to the restaurant. I'm at the bar, and, I literally just get fed by, neighbors at the bar. They're like, try this. You're going to love this. Oh, this is your first time. You're going to love this. I'd already eaten, so I wasn't starving, but just like, it was like a family style meal with like perfect strangers on my left, on my right. And, I got into a conversation with one couple who have been going to Simon's for quite some time, and I've never encountered people who have such a passion for a restaurant before, or a person. And they said, we come for Simon. He just, he's family. And, just some of the examples of things that he does to make people feel so beautiful. People wait hours to meet with him and to eat with him, and he greets people by name. And in some circumstances, people have waited so long, he has literally driven them in his car on a busy restaurant night down the street and bought their dinner at a competitive restaurant because they were waiting so long. He's like, I want you to eat. I don't want you, I want you to have a good time. I want you to, come back when it's not as busy. He just goes above and beyond to exceed people's expectations. One thing they do is bring out just a free slice of cake that literally his mom and dad make together. The dad bakes the cake, the mom ices it in the back room. And it's kind of like quasi, Italian flair, American food, just very good, very hearty. But what people say is like, the food's great, but people stay for him. They keep coming back for him. I heard one person say he makes strangers feel like friends and friends feel like family. And in this crisis of alienation and division that we are living amid right now, and an expression of that we're seeing is dehumanization, is viciousness, is cruelty. It's not a cliche that hurt people hurt people. When we see people acting with this viciousness, it's clear that they are hurting, but they're also hurting themselves and hurting other human beings. And anyway, in this climate that we are living through right now of alienation, of dislocation, of loneliness, institutions like this are so beautiful. They're communities. It reminded me of Cheers, where everyone knows your name. It reminded me of, kind of the anti-soup Nazi. This iconic episode in Seinfeld where it's like this deli in New York where he's just like incredibly rude and incredibly abusive, and like people still keep coming back because the food's so good and despite the abuse. I won't name names, but there's a restaurant here in Indianapolis. Amazing food, very inventive, so innovative, so good. One of my favorite restaurants. But it's like the hosts there and the staff receive training in like how to abuse people. It's like how to be as aloof and dismissive as humanly possible. Like, you are a profound inconvenience to me. And I just kind of laugh. I just like chalk it up to kind of the charm of the institution. It's like, you just know what to expect here, and just like have low expectations for how these people are going to treat you. And it's not delightful, but honestly, the food is really good. So anyway, the soup Nazi and these, I could actually think of two restaurants here in Indianapolis. There are great restaurants here with great customer service. I don't mean to besmirch the restaurant industry here, but just those two examples come to mind. But, Simon is like the opposite of that, where he makes people feel seen and known and loved in the fullness of who they are. It reminds me a lot of a story I tell almost every talk that I give, and it's in chapter 5 of my book, The Soul of Civility, of Joanna Taft's front porch. When I first moved from DC to Indianapolis, it took time for Indianapolis to feel like home. And I remember feeling kind of lonely. We didn't have any friends here. Family, my husband's family lived up northern Indiana. And one day after church, this tall blonde woman came up to me and introduced herself, said, "Hi, I'm Joanna. Would you like to porch with us sometime?" And I never heard the word porch used as a verb before, but I was curious and I didn't know many people in town. And so he said yes. And we went to her home that day and realized something subversive and radical, revolutionary, in fact, happening on Joanna's porch that day. She had curated people across race, geography, and vocation, not to have a structured dialogue in across difference, like, you say your bit, I say mine, but just to inhabit a shared space across these differences, to be human beings, to see each other as fellow citizens first. It was kind of an oasis from the world and these divisions. And that's what we all long for, to be seen and known and loved, and to not be essentialized and reduced and dehumanized. And that is what Simon provides for people in his beautiful way. And that is what I have seen as I've been on book tour in 160 cities now in 6 countries. I've seen people who are porching with and without a porch. They're saying, I can't control others, but I can control myself. And I'm going to double down and make my community more beautiful and better and stronger right where I am. And this is actually the story I closed with at my talk at the Urbandale Chamber of Commerce last week. I said, where is your porch? That's Simon's porch, where he makes every customer who comes through his door feel like a superstar and feel like just, seen and known. And that's radical. That's what keeps them coming back to go above and beyond for people, to build community. Again, the utmost competitive advantage. It doesn't matter whether you are a hotel, literally in hospitality, or a restaurant. You could be a banker. You could be the most utilitarian of service. But if you interface with anonymous strangers, there's an opportunity to go above and beyond for them and to acknowledge the dignity and humanity of the other in the small ways, because it matters. And that's, Simon and I had a conversation about that. I said, have you thought about what you do from here? And he's like, how do you grow? How do you scale? And he's like, I think Chick-fil-A does a pretty good job. And to be fair, they do. I never tire of hearing that. My pleasure. Every time they do something for you and you say thank you. But all that to say, you can't scale Simon. There's just one Simon, and he has, a partner, and he has kids, and and I'm thinking about this with my work and what I do. I only have so many days in the year and in my life that I want to be away from my family and doing this. Like, you can't scale. Like, how do we scale? And the reality is, it takes every single one of you watching this to individually make that decision. Where is my porch? Where's my garden? Where can I cultivate? Where can I show up, go above and beyond for people, and make others feel seen and known and loved in the fullness of who they are? So, Simon, if you're watching, thank you for being such a gracious host to me as a stranger in the greater Des Moines area. I went 2 nights in a row. I went my first night in Des Moines, and I went right after my keynote. I was like, I want to go tell Simon. I just shared his story, and everyone loved it, because everyone knows, everyone in my audience, my 350 business owners in Central Iowa, they all knew Simon. They all love Simons, and so it just felt like a really resonant example. And so Simon, can't wait to host you in our neck of the woods to Indianapolis, hopefully sometime soon. Bring the kids. So where is your porch? Where is your garden? And how are you going to make people feel seen and known and loved today? The small things matter more than we realize. Every single one of us has way more power to be part of the solution than we realize. So let's get to work.